Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Autism Now podcast. Today, I'm speaking to Candice Breetzke from Pretoria, South Africa. Candice studied honors in psychology and has an honors and master's degree in alternative and augmentative communication. She has over a decade of experience as well working with children on the autism spectrum. Welcome, Candice.
Thank you, Ilana.
Candice, what is AAC? Many of our parents have seen this abbreviation before, but I don't think we really understand what is AAC.
Okay, so AAC stands for Augmentative and Alternative Communication. So basically, it is giving a person who is unable to speak vocally for whatever the reason may be, a different form to be able to communicate with the people around them. So it really includes aided and unaided forms. So if we think of unaided forms, it would include things like gestures, eye blinking, pointing, and then some forms of sign language. And then if we think of aided forms, which is more what we use at the Star Academy, we think of using something other than your body to help you communicate. So that's where we come to using our pictures, picture symbols, our communication boards. At Star Academy, we use PECs quite a bit, and then to take it to our more technological options where we then start using an iPad with an app like Touch Chat or Simbo Talk or Proloquo to go. Those are just a few of the examples then of the unaided systems that we use. So basically, it's just providing somebody who cannot speak either with an alternative way to communicate, or for people who have a little bit of speech, but it's a bit unclear, we provide them with a way to augment their speech, so to make it more understandable to those around them.
I think what you do is very powerful. To give a child or an individual who can't speak a voice is very powerful. Candice worked with my son David when he was 2 years old. David is 20 years old. And David uses his iPad with Touch Chat. He has some vocal words, but augments his communication using Touch Chat on the iPad. And Candice, honestly, I don't know what we would do if David couldn't tell us what he wanted, what he was thinking, where he wants to go via the iPad. And I remember when we started working with him on the CARD ABA program, he actually got a Dynavox. It was a very heavy augmentative device to carry around. David liked this very heavy thing around. But today, we're very fortunate to have an iPad. I've got a very strong ballistics case for him so that he can't break it. A lot of kids at Star Academy also have a very strong plastic covering. You know, you can get them on Takealot or Loot or on Amazon, one where they can really carry it around with them. And I tell parents that my son David, when he wakes up in the morning, the first thing he does is he gets his iPad because that's his main form of communication. And when he falls asleep at night, the iPad is next to him because, you know, the iPad, he is very reliant on the iPad to communicate with us. Now, you were already doing ABA, so you were doing ABA 18 years ago. What made you decide to study AAC?
So I think when I started doing the ABA, I did some really good training there, and it was very focused on how to deal with children with autism and how to, I guess, elicit responses from them. But I think something that I noticed the whole time there was that they all struggled to communicate, whether it was just that their speech was unclear or that they actually couldn't communicate at all. And I really wanted to do something that could just equip me with more skills to be able to help the children that I worked with. And I think that was my primary motivation, was what can I study further to equip me better to work with these little kids that I work with. And so that's when I actually don't even remember how I came across the AAC at the university, but there's a center at the University of Pretoria for AAC. And when I read about what they do, I just thought, this is for me. So that's when I decided to do my honors. Those days, it was still a 2-year degree, but I squashed it into 1 year and did the degree in 1 year, and then decided to just do my master's in that. I found it really helped me also because it looked at how to deal with a variety of disabilities. It didn't only focus on communication. So it created this awareness about what else is out there, what other kinds of people we could also help. But it also better equipped me to try and encourage speech and communication from the kids that I worked with. So yeah, I think that's just my primary motivation was to help the kids I work with in a better way.
I think we're very fortunate to have you as a case manager for Star Academy. Now, who is AAC for? Who's eligible for AAC?
Okay, so that's a good question, because I think often people think that you need to have certain skills to be able to use AAC, but this is in fact not the case. So AAC is for anyone. It's for anyone of any age, with any level of disability. So just to sort of clarify that, I mean, at the center, we work with people who have severe cerebral palsy, who are in wheelchairs, that have support for their heads, for their legs, for their hands, for everything. And these people manage to learn how to use AAC and to successfully learn it to the point where they can testify in court about abuse that's been happening. So there is no prerequisite skill to use AAC. So I think depending on the level of functioning of the person that you're working with, you look at their level of representation and you would start them on that level. So if the person doesn't understand the symbolic meaning of things, you literally start teaching them with real objects. And then you build on it from there, and you teach basic, and I think we do a lot of that at Star Academy, where we teach the basic requesting, and we start requesting with highly reinforcing items, so that the person starts to learn the process of communication. And once they start to learn the process, you can start introducing different levels of representation. So instead of them using the actual packet of chips to say, I want chips, you would then give them a photo of the chips and let them request. So, there's no prerequisite skills, even in terms of physical ability. If you can't use your hand to select, there are other ways of selecting, whether it's using your eyes to point, or a head pointer, or an eye gaze system. So it's limitless in who we can actually help and who we can give a voice to, because I think that's the ultimate, is we want our children to have a voice, and so there is no prerequisite for that.
I'm getting goosebumps here listening to you speak honestly, because there is no limit, and anyone can learn, no matter what the diagnosis or severity is. And I think for the parents listening, that's just very, very hopeful to know that irrespective of a child's diagnosis, of their age, of their severity, there are ways that a non-vocal child or individual can learn to communicate in a functional way. Now, share some myths surrounding AAC.
Okay, so I think the first myth we've kind of covered, and that is that you need to have certain prerequisite skills in place. So that is in fact not the case. So another myth that I think we also deal with on a daily basis is that if my child is given an AAC device or an AAC system, they will never speak. Now, this is in fact completely untrue, because what AAC does, and I explain it to people, you see it as a crutch. So if you have a broken leg or an injured foot, you can't walk and you need a crutch to help you along. It doesn't mean you're never going to walk again, but for a period of time, you need something to carry you. So we often get little kids who do have the ability to speak, but sometimes the pressure that they feel to actually produce the speech makes them so anxious that they stop producing it. So the minute you give them a way to augment, so it's not an alternative, it's a temporary augmentative, intervention, you will see how these children relax and they start vocalizing a lot more. And often then they start speaking and developing speech because they have this backup. They have something to support them. And, all they've actually needed is this support. But I mean, you do then also on the other side get the people who need it as a permanent alternative to communication. But just because we are suggesting AAC for your child does not mean your child is never going to talk. I think okay, sorry.
I actually know that there's been published papers where they've actually shown from the data that the children are more likely to produce vocal speech because they have an AAC device. I know one of the reasons for the outcome of the study was that I think they said the iPad actually says the word in the same way over and over and over. Like if I say apple and you say apple, it's not the same, but when the iPad says apple, it's in the same way all the time. And the study did show that children who were given an iPad with a communication program like TouchChat actually developed vocal speech faster. But I really appreciate everything that you said, because when I speak to parents and they have young kids, and if the child is 4 years old, I'll say, look, we're going to work on vocal speech, but it's going to take time. So in the meantime, we don't want the children to learn bad behaviors or to acquire or communicate through their behavior, and giving them an appropriate means to communicate is so important while we're spending time practicing the vocal speech. Now, having studied AAC better equipped you to work with children with ASD?
Yes, so I think so. So I think one thing that I've noticed, and since I've now been lecturing a little bit again and just refreshed my memory, so many of the principles that we use in ABA, you also use in teaching children to communicate. So I think this is where what I liked about it when I started studying it is I could just see how the two tied in together, and how the principles for teaching communication reinforce the principles that we use in AAC, in ABA, so things like using reinforcement, based teaching rather than punishment based teaching to encourage the behavior that you want, using breaking things down into smaller steps when you are teaching the child. And that goes for communication as well as for teaching other skills. And so I think that's in the end why I decided to do my master's, because I could just see so nicely how the two tied in together and complemented each other. So it didn't only reinforce or teach me how to teach a child to communicate, but it definitely improved my abilities to do ABA. And a lot of what, they also in a lot of the literature refer to researchers who have done research, ABA related, research. So the two definitely tie in very well together.
I agree with you that it's possible to marry ABA and AAC, and I'm so happy we're having this conversation. Parents think sometimes, but you do ABA, how's that going to help my child communicate? And what I want parents to understand is that ABA is just a teaching methodology. It's rooted in the principles of psychology, and I always explain that it's like a rule book, and it contains teaching strategy. How can we teach the child that is developmentally skills deficit? We then at Star Academy also use the skills developing curriculum, which will tell us what developmental skills to target. But I think the unique thing about enrolling your child at the Star Academy is that we're going to tailor make a program to the individual needs of your child. And if your child is not vocal or can't communicate, having someone like you who's got a master's in AAC and then the years of experience in ABA and putting that together is just so amazing in ensuring the most incredible program for a child who's not communicating or who's not vocal and who's maybe not had success previously in establishing functional communication. So I think it's very, very unique, Candice, what you're able to offer just in terms of your AAC background and, you know, just marrying the AAC and the ABA. Now, what are some practical ways that AAC can be used apart from for communication?
Okay, so again, at the Star Academy, we use these practical ways so much in our sessions and in the way we work with children. So because it makes use of symbols, the use of symbols carries over to other things. So one of the things that we do at Star Academy is that we make use of a visual schedule. Now, a visual schedule is also actually an AAC strategy to help teach children communication, because it's basically like a to-do list that you would write for yourself, but now it is visually on the board. And so the child can see what their day looks like. Now, this has multiple functions because, first of all, it teaches them planning and organizing. Secondly, it gives them a sense of control over their environment and over their situation because they know what's coming next. So it gives them that predictability, which takes away anxiety, which then serves to minimize behavior because they know what to expect. They know what's coming next. And then by using the visual schedule, then also as a communication board almost, you could say, okay, well, can you tell me what we're going to do next? And your child will then go to the board, point out the picture and say, you know, painting, you know. So you're also teaching them a process of communication and selecting symbols. And then usually once the activity is done, you can teach them to go back, either remove it from the board or cross it out to indicate it's done. And now we'll be moving on to the next. So that's one of the things. The other way that we do it is a first and then schedule, where also, again, for children who can't tolerate a lot of lessons at one time or who really need to know what's coming next, but they need that visual, is to give them a visual of first we will be doing lessons and you have a picture representing lessons. And then you let them make a choice of what they would like as their reinforcer, and you put a picture on the then side of the board. So again, it's providing that visual, it's taking away anxiety, it's giving predictability, and then you're incorporating choice making, which is also, it's a big part of ABA, but it's also a big part of AAC, is teaching choice making. And it's a big part of communication, to be able to make choices, to choose if you want an apple or a sandwich. So we incorporate all of these strategies, but just from what I'm saying, you can see how the ABA and the AAC work together so nicely. I mean, other things that we do is teaching kids to use gestures and to understand gestures. So nodding and shaking your head, the gesture for stop and for come here. So that's all also AAC, but we teach it in ABA and we use it functionally in ABA to teach children to respond to these gestures and to use these gestures. So there are so many practical ways that we can use AAC strategies and techniques in ABA. And I think we do it almost now without thinking what it actually is, because it's such a part of the program.
It's been very interesting for me to hear you just explain the overlaps between AAC and ABA, and how they also just beautifully complement each other. And tell me, Candice, your message to parents. I have a 5-year-old non-vocal. My child is 7 years old and he's not. I have a 10-year-old and he cannot speak at all. What is your message to parents?
Okay, so I think the first thing I always tell a parent is, here at the Star Academy, we will teach anyone. That's the first thing. We're not going to turn you away. We're not going to say your child can't be taught. We will do what it takes to teach your child. That's the first thing. The second thing is we will help your child to be the best that he or she can be. We will set high goals and have high standards for your child to help them be the best they can be. In terms of AAC and language, I think I want to say, I always say to people, imagine someone had control of your voice and they could take it out. And when they felt it was necessary for you to speak, they'd put it back in and allow you to say what you needed to say and then remove it and hang on to it. You need to see AAC as your child's voice. And it does not need to be a high technology. It does not need to be an iPad with touch chat. It can be a PEX file. It can be a Leonard with images on that your child can have with them all the time. But there is a way for your child to communicate. And yes, I know you want to hear your little girl's voice and you want to hear your little boy say, I love you. But sometimes he's going to need to do that through an alternative means. It doesn't mean it's not coming from his heart. It just means he may not have the physical ability to produce those sounds. So you need to embrace AAC. You need to see it as your child's voice. They need to have it with them 24/7, just like David does. He wakes up with it and he goes to sleep with it. You do not remove his voice because you think he's going to sleep and he will not need it. So embrace AAC, and maybe it will become a way to augment, and your little one or your 15-year-old will develop speech, but it may become the alternative. And then we really need to have a positive outlook on that and accept it as your child's way of communicating.
I really like your advice. We have a number of kids that we work with at Star Academy, and I just want to talk about one little boy who is non-vocal, but he is so good on his iPad with touch chat that he's actually at school and he's managing with his facilitator, with his aide, a grade 2 curriculum in a mainstream classroom. And he cannot say one vocal word. He really can't. He relies on his iPad completely, and he has been coping beautifully in the classroom, obviously with support, and he's been included in the mainstream. And then I also want to tell a story about David. David was, I think, around 7 years old, and we had finally given him this Dynavox, which was an AAC device at the time. And David was learning beautifully how to express himself through the Dynavox. And I took him shopping to the mall, and we were in the toy shop. And David put his device down on the shelf, and I didn't see. And I turned away to leave, and I continued shopping. And 3 shops down the line, I realized this Dynavox is missing. And I ran to the information desk, and I was literally hysterical. They thought this is a crazy mother, because I don't even think they could actually make out what I was saying, because I was trying to explain that I've lost my son's little computer machine, and I was just besides myself. But I think they could see that David couldn't talk, and they called security and they asked me what stores I'd been to before, and everyone started hunting for this thing, and they found it. And it was in the toy shop. David had just put it down on a shelf, and they brought it to me. And I just remember absolutely sobbing, because David had, come to rely so much on the Dynavox. And we were just so amazed when we did give him the Dynavox. We couldn't believe what he could tell us. And I cried all the way home. And as I said, since then, we now actually don't need the Dynavox anymore. It was a very heavy device, and we're so fortunate to have the iPad. I want to ask you one last question, and I get this often from parents. I have a 3-year-old, and now you are recommending that we give him an iPad with touch chat, but I'm very concerned about his vocal speech. Are you sure, Candice? Won't the iPad prevent him from developing vocal speech?
Okay, so no, my answer would be yes. I'm definitely sure it won't prevent him from developing vocal speech. And I think we've all seen it like this. I have had a little girl come to me who could say 2 or 3 words. We actually never used an iPad. We actually just used PEX. And within a year, she was speaking in full sentences. So I think that often kids just need that support. They just need the crutch. And if you look at AAC, there are 3 levels of AAC. And if your child has the ability to speak, and I want to say combined with the ABA, that if they have that ability with that continued modeling of language, the ability for them to express themselves using their iPad or using their PECs, that language will come, because it's more exposure, it's modeling how to produce it, it's giving them the opportunity without pressure to produce it. And I think at Star Academy specifically, we are so focused on the vocal follow-up. So even if our child does select the button on touch chat, we will say, oh, so you want chips? Okay, here's your chips. And we continually do that vocal follow-up. So by combining the AAC device or system with your ABA, if your child has that ability, the AAC will not prevent it. If anything else, it will promote the development of speech. Definitely. I've seen it happen. And it is a definite possibility. It will not stand in the way of speech development.
Candice, thank you so much. It's been lovely to chat to you today. And thank you so much for explaining how AAC and ABA complement each other and for giving our parents hope. Thanks so much.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me, Ilana.